Kia ora, hello and welcome to this week's lecture. I'm going to talk today about something that is important in every culture, and that is how we farewell our people when they have died or passed away. Why talk about funerals, you might ask? Because in all cultures, the processes that take place around death can tell us a lot about how those people see the world, and also about their general beliefs and values. I'm going to specifically talk about what happens in Maori culture. Although you are unlikely to experience a Maori funeral, you'll be able to compare what you hear with what happens in your own culture and probably see some interesting differences and even some similarities. The differences that we see in how the dead are treated occur for many reasons. Some will be related to what the people believe happens to the spirit of the person after death, whether they believe there is an afterlife or reincarnation, which means the spirit continues in a form elsewhere or returns to earth in another form. Or it may be a matter of location. For example, in very hot countries, the body may need to be buried or cremated as soon as possible. Other differences simply relate to cultural practices. As you know, New Zealand has two main cultures, these being Maori and Pākehā, the general term used for New Zealanders of European descent. Most Pākehā are descended from immigrants who came in the 1800s from England, Scotland and Ireland, whose religion was Christian. Although many people nowadays are not very religious, they still often use a Christian church for the formalities of weddings and funerals. I grew up in New Zealand, but was not aware of how different a Pākehā funeral and a Maori tangi, also called a Tangihanga, are. I had had no reason to attend a tangi. I did know that they extended over several days and that people travelled from all parts of the country to attend, even if they were only distantly related. Children in European or Pākehā families were protected from death, and they didn't usually see the dead and mostly did not attend funerals, even those of quite close relatives. There was a feeling that children probably wouldn't be able to cope with the emotion, even though this was generally very controlled. Adults simply went to the church service and maybe also to the gathering afterwards for a cup of tea and a chat before the family went to the cemetery for the burial. It was something that took just a few hours in the morning or the afternoon and was then over. However, several years ago my husband's mother Betty died and I attended her tangi. This was a real learning experience for me as I was not familiar with the formalities and didn't speak or understand the Maori language. I felt uncomfortable a lot of the time. But since then I have often thought about it all and have come to understand the real value of so much that went on. I'm going to take you through the journey that was the 3 days following Betty's death. As we go, I'll also talk about what generally happens, and you'll see photos from other tangi. Unfortunately, I don't have any from Betty's, although taking photographs has become more common, it was not always acceptable. But first, let's look at some of the vocabulary you need to know. Funeral, the ceremony, which is usually religious, which happens before burying or burning the body of a dead person. Funeral home, a place where the dead person is prepared to be buried or burned and where relatives and friends can see the body. Coffin or casket, the box the body is placed in before the ceremonies. Tangi or tangihanga, the rites or rituals which are followed after someone has died, including the weeping, the crying, and the wearing of greenery and speaking. Marae, the communal meeting spaces including the meeting house, the area in front of it, and the dining hall associated with a particular group of extended families. Pākehā, the Maori term for people of European descent. Tikanga Maori, Maori customs and traditions that have been developed over time. So what happens? First of all, when the person dies, their body is prepared and placed in a coffin or casket. They will be dressed in their best, made to look at peace, and usually covered up to the neck. At a Maori tangi, the coffin's lid is not put on at this stage. Instead, the coffin will usually be draped with a special feather cloak. Feather cloaks are valuable treasures in Maori communities and are always seen on special occasions. Then the first important decision has to be made. Where is the body to be taken? In our Christian tradition, The body would usually stay at the funeral home until it is taken to the church for the service before burial. But it was not so simple for Betty. She had a lot of travelling to do before she could be put to rest. Betty was an important person in many lives and had provided a home and care for many young men who struggled in society. She was less present in the lives of her own sons, though, but I'll talk more of that later. She had also done significant community work and was going to be missed by a lot of people. So the first stop in her journey was the South Auckland Community Marae, where she lay in state for a day and a night. Hundreds from across the city gathered there to mourn and honour her. The marae is at the heart of Maori society. All Maori can trace their genealogy or whakapapa back to the original groups which travelled to New Zealand hundreds of years ago. There are numerous sub-tribes or clans which descend from a common ancestor, and each of these is made up of many extended family groupings. All smaller groups have their own marae or communal meeting place, which is made up of a meeting house, a separate dining hall, and most importantly a welcoming and meeting area in front of the meeting house. The term marae refers to this area specifically, but also to the whole collection of buildings. Nearby will be a cemetery and possibly also a small church. The picture here is a typical example. It is Mitimiti, a very small community in Northland which I will refer to later. 2 large tents have been erected for the tangi and the permanent buildings are in the background. These include a couple of houses for the caretaker of the marae. Traditionally, anyone from the family can choose to be buried at their marae, no matter how long they have been away from the family lands or tangata whenua. Many Maori wouldn't want to be buried away from the place of their ancestors, even if they had lived most of their life somewhere different. Over the years, it has caused huge grief when, for example, bodies of soldiers killed in battle are not returned for burial. This is an ongoing issue, and just at the end of March this year, the government announced that the bodies of 36 soldiers who died serving in wars overseas will be returned to their families in New Zealand later in October. The full welcome ceremony or paufiri was performed. The pic you see is of another tangi for the New Zealand artist Ralph Hoteri, whose body was flown from Dunedin in the South Island to Mitimiti, also in the Hokianga area. The casket is being taken from the helicopter before being welcomed onto the marae. This next picture shows the welcome stage of another tangi for Ranganui Walker, held on Ōrākei Marae just above Mission Bay. Among the visitors arriving is the Maori king, who carries a tokotoko, a special carved stick, which is an important part of later proceedings during the tangi. Note also the women who wear garlands of greenery, symbolising. The rituals we experienced for Betty were typical of traditional tangi, although there can be variations in different parts of the country. After the welcome, the car is carried into the meeting house, where it is placed at the centre at the back, surrounded by family photos and more garlands of greenery. Each arriving group brings their photos of the people who make their connection with the deceased person, so that while seated in the meeting house, everyone is surrounded by the people of the past, either as carved around the walls or in photos. These are an important part of keeping the memory of all the kinship links. Then comes the time of the family gathering and grieving around the casket. It is important that the body is never alone, as Maori believe that the spirit does not depart until the time of the burial. Close family members take turns to sit beside it. As the lid is open, everyone can see, touch and talk to Betty. Over the next 2 days and through each night, the welcome ritual is repeated for each new group of visitors as they arrive. The old women wail loudly. This is really a strong feature of a tangi, and it seems to reach deep into your heart. It sets the tone for the tangi and encourages people to express their grief. In contrast to a Pākehā funeral, where people are reserved and try not to show their sorrow too much, at a tangi, grief is very public, and many think that the louder it is, the better. They think that such sharing helps people work through the loss. Some visit for just a short time, but many stay. Mattresses are out in the meeting house and everyone shares the space for sleeping. Meals are taken in the separate dining room, and everyone helps prepare for these and for the feast which will follow the burial. However, close family are not expected to do any of this work. They are given their time to say goodbye. Neither are they expected to pay for everything. The costs of hosting 100 or more people for so long are shared by contributions from everyone. This is the time when family connections are renewed, when stories are told and retold, when young generations learn of their history, and when everyone learns a lot more about their dead. Children learn that death and emotion are a part of life and not to be feared, and they learn as well to sit still and quiet when elders are talking. But it was not all solemn. Over 2 days there was also lots of laughter, some hilarious stories and singing. Someone naturally always has a guitar. And there is a lot of talking. Maori custom is that on the second night anyone can say what they want directly to the dead. It is a time for retelling special stories about shared events, or a chance to finalise any grievances or disagreements that you may have had. As the tokotoko or talking stick is passed from one to another, sometimes the words are strong and loud, with mixed emotions of grief and anger. The speaker talks directly to the person, and Betty certainly heard about how much her social work took her away from her own sons. She was badly missed at home, and each one had to find his own way to deal with that. However, this is a process towards forgiveness, and by the end of all the talking we knew why she was so loved and respected. I believe this tradition, which recognises the person's failings as well as the hurts they may have caused, alongside their best qualities, is one of the most valuable parts of the tangi. Individuals are heard, are never interrupted, and they can then feel that something has been settled. This contrasts with a Christian service where usually only the good things are spoken of. People may joke lightly about a person's failings, but there's not the direct speaking to the person, which is the feature of a tangi. Many Māori are also Christian, but this part of the tangi is a separate thing from the later church service. At Mototi, this talking continued long into the night and sleep was impossible. Finally, at dawn on the last day, the lid of Bessie's coffin was nailed down. There was more wailing as the day began. It was raining. Some say that it rains the most for those who are honoured the most, so no one minded the rain. Similar to those in the photo, mourners carried this coffin up along the road and up the hill to the small church. There was a Christian service, and then as the rain continued to pour down, it was laid to rest in the ground. Suddenly the sun emerged. To finalise the farewell to her, the men cried out and stamped their chests and feet in a traditional haka. This may surprise you. You may be familiar with the haka that the All Blacks, our rugby football team, perform before their international games. Then it is part of a challenge, reflecting its origin as a war dance. But it is also used to bring people together and to express respect for the person it is being performed for. It is really an honour to be welcomed or farewelled with a. At this time, as Betty's body is now released into the care of the Earth Mother, Māori believe that her wairoa, or spirit, now travels to Cape Reinga. Here it passes down the roots of the putakawa tree there, through to the underworld for the return to Hawaii. This is the mythological place which was the homeland for all the Māori ancestors who migrated to New Zealand. This is the reason why Cape Reinga and Spirits Bay are such important and spiritual places for Māori and other New Zealanders. It will be a place many of you will visit if you haven't been there already. So having celebrated Betty's life, we return in the sunshine to the dining room for a final feast. This was the time for the best food, for the hangi to be lifted up from the ground. The tables were laid out as if for a great party, and everyone's mood was lighter. There was more laughter and general conversation, and everyone then chatted about their own lives, their activities with the children or at work, and everyday matters. They even touched on politics or land issues. It seemed right that we could now move into a happy and light-hearted time before driving back to Auckland, having given Betty a proper farewell. Betty's tangi was in the traditional style, but of course customs evolve over time, and as I mentioned earlier, many people or their families choose not to be taken to the marae. Instead, the body will be taken to the family home where they will lie in state, just as at the marae. And again, the lid is not placed on the coffin until the last morning. People sit constantly with the corpse. Again, everyone is allowed to personally say their farewell to the person who has died. Traditional customs are still followed, such as the welcome karanga, the wailing, wearing garlands of leaves, the prayers and singing. The body will later be buried in the local cemetery or cremated. Whereas traditionally Māori always buried their dead, cremation is also acceptable now, which is an influence from European culture. However, influences go both ways in New Zealand, and it's now quite common for Pākehā families to take their dead home for a day or two before the funeral service, especially if there is a delay to allow people to come from far away. There may still be a difference though. To respect the fact that many people are uncomfortable in the presence of the body, it may be placed in a bedroom rather than in the centre of things, in the main living room. People then have to move away from the main gathering if they want to spend time with the deceased. And it is also likely that there would be times when the body is left alone, something totally unacceptable in Māori tradition. Another key difference between the two traditions is the amount of time that people have together. Māori family ties are constantly strengthened by the many hours they spend at tangi. But Europeans do not have gathering spaces like the marae, and there is not often a place to be for such extended periods. The few hours of a European funeral do not allow enough time for more than a short conversation with each person, and often feel disappointing in that respect. There is no process for reminding people of all their family connections and their history. This difference is reflected in the way Māori history generally is viewed as a part of everyday life, and issues around things like land are fought for over many generations. It is not unknown for Pākehā to have a tangi. One of our best-known poets, James K. Baxter, spent many years living with Māori at a community called Jerusalem on the Wanganui River. When he died, the people honoured him with a full tangi, and you can see part of it in the picture. In his poetry and in his daily life, he had tried to integrate Māori concepts such as hospitality to friends and strangers with his own European cultural tradition. They respected and loved him for that. Nui Walker is interesting for showing the evolving traditions. He was a widely respected lecturer at Auckland University, and although he came from another part of the country, he chose to have his tangi at Aoraki Marae. He also chose to be cremated. Because of his first choice, there was significant discussion between his family group and the Aoraki Marae hosts over where he should actually be buried, and this is referred to in the videos that follow. There are 4 short videos which will give you an overall feel of some parts of the tangi, which was held over 2 separate days. 2 of them are in Māori, but there are good English subtitles. If you choose to watch the 3rd and 4th videos, which follow those, these have English commentary, but the subtitles are not accurate. To Ranginui Walker's tangi, you can also see parts of a homemade video of a family tangi held in the home. The interesting parts of this are, firstly, from the beginning to 1 minute 5 seconds, where there is a karanga and the casket is removed from the house. Secondly, from 4.14 to 4.41, showing the service at the cemetery and lowering the body. And thirdly, from 7.40 to 9.27, showing the haka the men do before the final feast, which is being held in a community centre. You'll notice that the haka is in suits, which you probably won't have seen. This shows that the haka is just a part of the proceedings and not something that they feel they need to change into traditional style clothing for. This next slide shows the core aspects of a Māori tangi. You can see that the deceased person is absolutely at the centre of everything. They have their connections with the ancestral spirits, but their close family is really significant. Extended family come from great distances often, they're there as well. Visitors come and go, and that all renews the connections among all of those people over those 3 long days together. The aspects of tikanga Māori, which is Māori tradition and customs that are significant, are hospitality, of course. Everybody is well looked after, doesn't have to worry about anything. There is huge respect and honesty that is given to everybody, but also to the deceased person. That everybody supports one another, and of course there is music and singing and a good spirit. In summary, as one person has noted, the tangi is the key Māori cultural expression, full of ritual and emotion. It is a showcase of oratory, song and storytelling. It is as much for the living as for the dead, and is the space where relationships are celebrated, challenged and nurtured. It is where talk is of politics, sports, business and gossip, and it's a great networking event for Māori. Emotion and drama are expected and encouraged. It centres on key Māori beliefs, including the constant connection between the spiritual and human worlds. It matters that we know we are not alone in the universe, that we are part of a pattern that began at the world's creation and which will be there at the end. The tangi may evolve and adapt, but it will no doubt remain important for any understanding of Māori culture, and I certainly found it so. Thank you for watching and listening. Now, if you'd like to go to the Kahoot and answer the questions, that will also register your attendance. Goodbye.